Our first panel is Rewriting the Narrative. In the past decade, and especially in the last year, we've seen increased visibility and contributions of Asian Americans to the field of cultural journalism. Today, we're joined by the authors of the forthcoming book, Rise, a pop history of Asian America from the 90s to now, to discuss how entertainment journalism can impact the greater cultural perception of Asians in America. Here to introduce our panelists and to moderate the discussion is Michelle Sugihara, Executive Director of CAPE, the Coalition of Asian Pacifics in Entertainment.
Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. And happy National Authors Day. What a fitting day to have this conversation. I'd like to call up our lovely authors and panelists, Jeff Yang, Phil Yu, and Philip Wang. Everyone, please give a round of applause. So these three gentlemen have written this book called Rise, a pop history of Asian America from the 90s till now. I'm holding in my hand one of 3 of these copies that exist in the world, so I'm being very careful with it. All right, well, I'm so glad that we have 3 hours to talk about this book because there's so much. Oh.
An hour a decade.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like we only have 25 minutes. I have 3 hours of questions, so why don't we just jump right in? I was curious, first of all, where did the idea of this book come from? And why is it important to you to tell it now?
So it is, as you might guess, kind of our big COVID quarantine project. The 3 of us who are still getting used to not wearing drawstring pants, like many of you, I'm sure, we got together online on Zoom, as one does, to talk actually early in the pandemic about how different the world felt, how we had accrued all this momentum, all this energy. Just a year before, we had been celebrating Asian August and Crazy Rich Asians and a seeming pivot in cultural consciousness. And then literally we were sitting in front of our monitors, with or without pants, trying to talk over barking dogs and screaming kids and also looking at headlines and encountering the realities of walking through the world as an Asian American and realizing that a lot of those advances we'd made could be ripped away so rapidly, simply because of this sort of broader threat that we were facing. And I think that where we landed was we needed to actually capture and archive all the advances that we'd made in just changing our representation, the way we were in the world, and in part to celebrate it, but in part also to, lay out a map in case we had to rebuild it.
Oh my gosh.
If we had 30 more years.
Yeah, I see the start as a few months prior to that, prior to the pandemic, and actually just whenever we would chat or meet up at different events, and especially it's around Asian August, and I remember kind of lamenting to Jeff and Phil, seeing articles that traditional press would be writing and saying, oh, this is the first Asian project in 25 years. And I'm like, no, it's not. There's been a lot of, yes, I guess on that scale with the studio, blah, 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 all those, asterisks assigned to it. But there's been tons of great progress from our community. And it made me really sad, especially the fact that, we're all part of that progress to see that on a mainstream level, that it has not been seen, it has not been captured. There's no reference point for a lot of these journalists who are writing these clickable headlines. And we're like, hey, we need to put something down here we need to create something that does capture, at least for ourselves, what has been going on for the last 25 plus years. And I just remember, there's a lot of Asian American history books that are out there that I've written, but nothing that was more contemporary or capturing less of the doom and gloom stuff and more of the, hey, this is the really cool stuff that we've made progress in. So I feel like and then I remember, it's so funny, I remember Jeff saying hey, I'm gonna try to, I think this is a great idea, we should turn this into a book. I've never been in the publishing world whatsoever. So I'm like, okay, if you can go do it, get back to me when you can. And then like a few months later, he's like, Phil, we have an agent. We're gonna go pitch the book. I'm like, wait, what's going on? So kudos to Jeff, really for spearheading this project from the beginning.
It's definitely Jeff. It's been sort of the big brother. I mean that because he's older than us. But I think, Jeff and I have especially been sort of covering this space for a very long time, and it felt so much, it's so weird that a lot of it happens and it passes through our fingers, and then we have conversations over beers, be like, oh, remember that thing that happened? Like, that was really big for our community, and then, and there seems to be no sort of collective remembering of that, and so, and I think also with these celebrations that we're really enjoying at this moment, but also the stuff that we're going through that feels like regressive and 2 steps back, et cetera. Like, we have to remember that none of that stuff happens in a vacuum. Like, there's been all this history that leads up to that, and so we wanted a document or something that really kind of pointed to our collective history as a community, where someone could actually refer to it. That it is legit and documented, as opposed to just things that like, oh, remember that thing that happened, We don't have anything like that,
No, that's amazing. I love how that you brought up Asian August. So for those of you who may not remember, Asian August was a hashtag that Cape actually started after a conversation that I had with Janet one night. So this is all coming full circle. It was August 2018. There were 5 feature films that came out that month that featured Asian Americans behind or in front of the camera. It was Dog Days, The Meg, Searching, Crazy Rich Asians, and The Darkest Minds. And so that was Asian August in 2018. So this is obviously a massive topic to cover. You talk about dance, history, politics, law, theater, sports. Like, how did you decide what to include? Because I think it's 400 pages.
It's
so
almost
this could have been like 4,000 pages.
Can I just say first, before we say anything, is that within those 400 plus pages, whenever I look at the book right now, and I don't know if other authors go through this, all I can think about is the stuff that didn't make it into the book. Like, we just could not get everything in there. And
Sequels.
For me, I always lament, like, God, I wish we could, like, there's just stuff that's not going to make it in. And so may that be the sort of caveat. But
that's really the biggest thing that we actually want to make clear here. That as comprehensive as we tried to make it, oh my gosh.
There's only 3 right now.
I know.
That's our real life NFT right there, man. We're selling that one.
Exactly. But for everything we could include, the things we couldn't include killed us, right? Especially once we sent it off to the printers, knowing that it was indelible, right? We're like, oh my, how did we forget that thing? But one of the things I think that helped us a lot is that early on we recognized the 3 of us, as much as we'd each lived through basically as an adult, we started our lives in a different decade, right? Like the 1990s, the 2000s, the 2010s, and that was going to be the, as you can tell. Architecturally, the spine of the book was going to be those 3 decades, and we introduce each book with a first-person kind of essay that explores kind of the backdrop of that decade. But the important thing was that we recognized that as 3 East Asian guys, 2 of whom are named Phil, we didn't represent the full diversity of our incredible community. And so the first thing we did really was to organize the village, reach out to as many people as possible who could tell those stories that reflected the breadth of experience, of identity, of culture, and especially, I think, of lived experience. And some of the things which I folded out, by the way, one of the things we really fought for in the book was to not just have this be a book about pop culture and, the achievements that went out to the outside world. We wanted to open up our world. We wanted to show what it meant to be Asian American in these decades. So we have these things we call spaces, which are those pull-out things, which are annotated pictures of things like an Asian American Film Festival, a college cultural festival, life during COVID, stuff like that, and highlighting essentially the different ways in which Asian Americans, our community, experienced those worlds. So that was one set of lenses.
Yeah, it really wasn't like even when you ask your questions like how do we dive in or how do we choose, and it really wasn't that scientific. We just decided, or not. One day we were like, okay, I guess we have to start this book, and so we got on a meeting over Zoom, and we just opened up an Excel sheet and we just started listing everything that we could remember. And thankfully, we have someone who had a blog that covered everything. But no, we just kind of like went into our own collective memory to think about what was definitely out there, and also things that were more personal to us, right? And things that were maybe not as covered, or things that were more of a subculture to even within our own diverse community. And we literally just made a long list, and we started assigning other writers or other contributors that he would be great for this, she'd be great for this, well, and just start reaching out, and then we'd have to also like list out the things that we'd have to cover because we couldn't get everyone to do every piece, right? So it really was just throwing things on the wall, and then hopefully we could find someone that wanted to talk to us, and it was essentially just a massive journalism project. Like I realized like through this, like there was little bit of like authorship, but then I definitely felt like I was going to like journalism 101 that I've never experienced before. So it was pretty incredible, and we definitely bit off way more than we could chew. I think like when Jeff was like, "Oh, you're gonna come in and do the 2010s, right?" And like I was like, "Sure, I'll contribute. I'll be there for a few meetings." And then it was like, "No, we got to do this all." And like Phil was saying, we definitely still feel like we missed certain things. The deeper you get, the more you feel like, "Oh man, everyone deserves to be seen and heard." And each like essay in this book could be its own book. And so we're just kind of giving a very, very general overview as best as we could.
I love this concept of spaces, and it's one of the things about even these shirts that we're wearing is this is another space, and how merch can also contribute to pop culture. And so Jeff is wearing his East West Players shirt. I'm wearing a shirt by 33 Edge, which is Kelly Hu's company. And so it's really neat to see all of the different shirts. I know Phil has his Stay Angry shirt.
We had a piece that was about significant T-shirts, actually.
Yeah, which is up here.
And we had to cut it, unfortunately. But, like, that's how deep we were going.
We cut it for space.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Got reduced to a paragraph, yeah.
Well, CAPE is celebrating our 30th anniversary, and so I've been thinking a lot lately of these past 30 years, so I was really excited to see that that's really what this book covers. And I'm curious as to all that you've researched and seen, where do each of you see the next 30 years?
That's
Yeah.
That's a good question. Because I could not have anticipated even the last 5 years
Exactly.
where things have gone. You know what I mean? Like, I started my blog 20 years ago. This is the 20th anniversary of Angry Asian Man, and I could not have, when I first started the blog, could not have imagined the things that we've seen in the last year, good and bad. You know, and so the change even in the last 5 years has been a huge leap. I think that it will not be so difficult for us to muster up the energy to create a book like this. I think that it'll be actually even hard to document everything because there's just so much stuff happening, right? And with each thing that happens, and we always cite like Crazy Rich Asians as like a big moment, right? That's like a post kind of in this, guiding the way along the way. I think those things will be fewer and fewer in terms of like things that we ascribe so much meaning to because they'll happen more regularly, and so not everything will make or break us whether or not they fail or succeed. It'll just be like another thing, another expression. And so I hope we get to the place where everything is meaningful, but not so meaningful that that we have to always kind of remind ourselves that, oh, this is a big deal. Like, it's just another thing that happens in our community,
Yeah, I think like what's great right now is that we're building expectation and precedence, right? So like there's a generation of young people that are growing up now that they expect to see films and they expect to see characters and casting and content that reflects the world, reflects them. And they shouldn't let that go, right? It should continue to progress. And those that are coming before them should continue pushing the envelope, but I think what's great is that like just to what Phil's kind of saying is like hopefully a little bit what we have been doing becomes more normalized, and when you start to normalize the base and the foundation, you have room to start pushing and reaching for things that maybe were like not within your orbit before. And I think that's what's really exciting to come to see. Because like even right now, like, you know, Wang Fu Productions was a few years behind. 17 years, almost 18 years, and the same thing. I could not have imagined anything close to this when we started. Couldn't have even like social media wasn't even around. That's what's even crazier. So it's just gonna. We're just gonna get more and more nuance, which I think is really important. So far, the diversity of even within our greater Asian American community is kind of what we've normally been seeing. But there's so much more to mine into, and I feel like there's so much more to see that like it's gonna be a while before we're like, oh man, this again or whatever. I think like if anything, we're getting past the first humps of some storytelling tropes that we're gonna keep exploring, and that's what I'm most excited for.
So yes, well, so you entitled your book Rise, and you, as you mentioned, you brought in a whole host of collaborators and community members, and so in the panels that I lead, I like to have a segment called Shine, and I would love for each of you to lift up someone in the community that you want to give some shine to, and just, again, this is also looking forward to the next 30 years. Who is this next generation that we should be paying attention to?
There's actually one person who I want to give shine to who isn't on stage, but almost should be, and that is Jess Vu, who is kind of our fourth member of the trio. We brought her on early, not just because she is somebody who lent perspectives and context that we didn't have ourselves, but she also is more connected, you know, has deeper and broader networks, and especially, you know, into both the creative and the activist context of a younger generation than certainly I was born into. So without her contributions, her work, her partnership, and all of this, it would have been, I think, quite impossible. But I think also, I will say this, there's more Southeast Asian and more Filipino and more South Asian content in here than we possibly could have gotten because of Jess and her contacts. And that was such a really important thing for us to ensure that we had that kind of inclusion.
That's fantastic. I will plus one that she's a longtime volunteer of CAPES, and I finally locked it down. I put a ring on it earlier this year. She's now full-time, so she's phenomenal. How about you, Phil?
But what was the question?
Give shine to somebody.
Give shine to somebody.
You want me to give you a minute?
Yeah,
All right.
go for it. Yeah.
I'm not gonna. There's not like a particular name, but I'm gonna like just take a note from when I first came to LA, or like right after graduating, and like YouTube was just starting. I remember meeting a lot of people that kind of turned their noses up to YouTube and just, you know, DIY creators, and I felt very lonely in this town, and not a lot of people took what we were doing seriously. Actually, even being featured on Phil's website at the time was like making it. That was like the only place where we got some shine. So thank you, Phil. So I'm gonna put the shine on like the TikTokers right now. I know we want to like roll our eyes or whatever, but like honestly, like they're the future, and the talent will rise to the top. And that's just, people are looking for any ways for themselves to find creativity, for them to express themselves. And we should, I really think like in this industry, it's very convenient or easy for us to just kind of like close off to just whoever's, again, like in our own little orbit and what we know. But it does take a little bit of getting uncomfortable and to try to understand, hey, like why are people there? What's going on? And I definitely do my best to try to like see and appreciate and acknowledge the next generation that's coming up, because it really is about sending the elevator back, right? I think a lot of people talk that and say that, but you don't see it very often. And I get it right now, like, you know, our community is still like, I think growing and still finding its footing. But that's what I would like to encourage everyone here to think about, that yeah, this is literally for the next generation, so we should literally be trying to reach out to them and find ways to collaborate.
Thank you.
On that note, I think I'll go a little bit older than that, which is sort of the Asian American contingent on Twitter.
What? Shining light on Twitter?
Like Twitter gets a bad rap because, and frankly, a lot of stuff happens on Twitter sucks. Okay, but I want to give shine to the people who have been creating a community there that are about lifting up our community, about creating a space where like creators are celebrated and creators are supported, and there is a ton of that happening. I feel as much as whenever I like put something on Twitter, I right before I hit tweet, like there's a little cringe at like, oh God, what's this gonna start or not or not. But there's also that contingent that is always very that is creating community, that is uplifting voices, and is interested in creating a sense of a future of like, let's keep this going, you know. And so, as much as there's a lot of bad stuff that happens on Twitter, but like as much as that is the case, there is also like there is true community, and I'm actually quite happy to be part of it.
I gotta find your community. I gotta get on your timeline. I'm not seeing that.
Well, I mean, I will say one thing. Growing up in places where there aren't a lot of other Asian Americans, and I grew up in New York, but I grew up in Staten Island, New York, which is the least New York part of New York. It's the most New Jersey part of New York. In an almost entirely white neighborhood, went to school in a mostly white school. I was one of two people who was non-white in my class, in fact, and the other guy was Asian, a guy named Al Yu, beginning my life of collaborating and befriending people whose last name is Yu. But the fact is, one of the biggest things I think we were missing, that I was missing, was just that point of recognition, that nod you get when you see somebody who shares your experience. And whether it's social media, or whether it's a book like this, or whether it's a room full of people like this, even just being able to look out and see that there are people who reflect you in some fashion, who represent you in some fashion, is such an uplift that I could not have imagined growing up in the 80s and 90s. And thank you guys for putting this together. Really the first event that a lot of us have been to face-to-face, you know?
Well, thank you all for writing this book. And I mean, it's a lot of work that went into it, and I can imagine a lot of hours. And all three of you are just pioneers in our community, and so just want to uplift all of you and thank you for that. So please, as we close, tell us where we can find this book, when does it come out, how do we support it in the meantime, all that good stuff.
You know, so we hustled to get this book done when it was supposed to come out in November, meaning now. Like, it was agonizing. We all sort of hated each other a little bit or a lot. And our editor, who's lovely, we were very, very frustrated and just bleeding tears and whatever. But the book, unfortunately, ran into the supply chain issues that we're all facing. We literally got a message saying that Europe is out of paper.
It's a literal paper issue.
Yes. So it got pushed into March, and so it will be available, I think, officially in stores like the end of February, officially pub date March 1. We do hope you guys get a chance to see it, and we have some. I brought some galleys. They're very uncorrected. They're very ugly, but for some of you guys who want a little bit of a sneak peek, we can leave some of those behind.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you. Thank you.